Last Sunday, we finished up a 4-week series called Consume. How many of y'all enjoyed that series and feel you benefited from it? If you haven't had a chance to see it, you can go online, watch it on our website. But in the message last week, in the fourth of the ending message of that series, I made a statement in there that went something like this. We were talking about what it means to be consumed by generosity. And in that statement, I said, generous people create generous churches which develop generous communities. Generous people create generous churches which create generous communities. Later, after the service at 11:30, like we will be doing every Sunday at 11:30 between down and occupancy, some of us went over a couple of blocks to our new site where we're going to be meeting, and we were doing our 15 minutes of prayer. 11:30 every Sunday. Y'all get my subtlety right there? Okay, so 11:30, we were over there praying. And when it was my turn to pray, I found myself actually praying that statement. And then I found myself in the moment of prayer saying, God, what if? What if that was true for Connect Church? And through Connect Church, that spirit began to permeate throughout our community and throughout other churches, so much so that builders couldn't build homes fast enough, realtors couldn't get listings fast enough, lenders couldn't get loans approved fast enough, because people wanted to move into the 85205, and they had no reason why, but there was something compelling them, and what they didn't know was it was the fervent spirit, the power of the Holy Spirit moving through our church and through other churches that made this the place people wanted to be. It's okay. And I found myself praying that, and then I found knowing what we were going to discuss this morning, processing that a little bit more as I was preparing for this week. And so if you want to grab the notes in the middle of your worship folder and buckle up because you want to drink from a fire hose here for the next couple of minutes, I want to walk you through some things about our community. How many of you in this room this morning actually live, stay, or reside in the 85205? A good number of you. So you probably already know everything I'm about to share, so just tolerate me anyway. But here's some things you should know about our community. What it is we're doing. Who it is we're ministering to. How it is we're going to minister to them. What that's going to look like somewhere around 60 days from now. Here's what it looks like. The population currently in the 85205 is 43,000 people. 43,000 people live in this one zip code. Now, using the standard that 87% of the Phoenix metro area population do not go to any Christian church on Sunday, that means that basically, using round numbers, if you live on a street that has 10 houses, you're the only people in church from your block this morning. So that means that this morning in the 85205, there are 37,410 people in our zip code not in church, not worshiping and honoring God. Sobering. What else does that mean? Well, of this 43,000, approximately 80% of us are white or Caucasian, and approximately 14% are Hispanic. The other 6% is just kind of a hodgepodge. Now here's the good news. I can't see because of the lights, but if you look around our church on any given Sunday morning, there are somewhere between 10 and 15 different ethnicities sits in this school auditorium every Sunday morning. We're ahead of the curve. That's something to celebrate. Something to celebrate. Now here's some other stuff. The average age in the 85205 is 50 years. Now, why is that important? That informs how we do ministries. That informs what we can anticipate in terms of children, what we can anticipate in terms of students, who it is we're going to be ministering to, what are the norms. The average household income is $61,222 per year. Now, that also informs some things about our church, about the kind of classes we'll offer, about the kind of groups we need to do. If people in our zip code as a household are living on $61,222 a year, we have to then think about what's going on. What are the debt-to-income ratios as people try to keep up with the Joneses? Because on one hand, that's a lot of money, and on the other hand, that's not so much money. That informs the kind of ministries. That informs the kind of things like the Consume series that we just came through, what we need to do, how we need to do it. It talks about the lifestyles. It also does something else. That informs our church and every other church in our community. That informs our budget. You see, the Bible gives us an objective standard on how people who are followers of Jesus are supposed to live their lives and handle their money. As we learned in the Consume series, the Bible says that a Christian is called to tithe, or to give, what's a tithe? Talk to me. 10%. So that means that the per capita household income, on average, as we would think about our budget and how we would do ministry, what we would do in ministry, why we would do ministry, that we would expect the average household that attends this church to contribute a little over $6,000 a year. You still with me? So if that means, just to use round numbers, if you're giving a little over $6,000 a year, and we had 100 giving units, that means we would have a $600,000 budget. If we have 50 households, that means we have a $300,000 budget. If we have 200 households, I can't think that big. So that informs us how we do it. Then what are we going to do with that money? How it is we're going to serve this community. How are we going to do that? To reach people, to impact people. It's God's plan. And God understood that way back when He wrote the words of Scripture through the different prophets and through the different authors and through the different disciples, what was going to happen in the 85205 2,000 years ago, and what it was going to take to reach people, to teach people, to communicate with people, to help people. Of the people who live here in our community, 16% of our residents have been through a divorce. That's almost 7,000 people. That's 6,880 people who live in our community have been through a divorce. Some of us in this room have been through a divorce. What are the hurts that those people have? What are the hopes they're still holding on to? What are the different things they struggle with? You may or may not be aware, but that number means that Mesa ranks 13th in the entire United States in the divorce rate. So 13th most divorced city in the United States. Arizona is 15% ahead of the national average when it comes to divorced households. Well, that informs the kinds of things we would do in ministry, the kinds of classes we would instruct, the kinds of relationships we would build, the kind of sensitivity we want to bring when we're sharing in conversations and messages, in relationships, in our connection groups. It informs all kinds of things that are going on. Now, here are some things about Mesa you may or may not know. The violent crime rating in Mesa, which is like murder, rape, and personal violence, is 40 out of 100. The national average is 31. There is a reason Mesa is on the 6 o'clock news 7 nights a week. We're ahead of the national average. So here's the question we have to ask. If violent crime rating is 9 points ahead of the national average, maybe we should be asking our city leaders, how can we as a movement, as a people of faith, serve our community, not the other way around? The property crime rating in Mesa is 44 out of 100. The national average is 38. Why? Why are we ranking ahead? You can't tell everything that you research in a message like this, but I happen to know that a lot of the violent crime rating and even some of the carryover in the property crime rating all over domestic issues. What does that say about the households we're attempting to serve? What does that say about people needing the hope of Jesus Christ because they can't find it in some other situation in their lives? How do we help? How can we make a difference? There happen to be 54 registered sex offenders living in the 85205. And then here's something really interesting. Currently, literally currently, as of this week, there are 2,317 new homes under construction in 343 communities with 128 different builders. These homes range in cost from $49,000 all the way up to $4,995,000. In addition to that, there are 52 separate apartment complexes in the 85205. Now, this statistic alone tells us as a congregation quite a bit. It tells us with that much construction going on that our economy is beginning to surge, and the Arizona statistics would bear that out. That tells us that things are improving and the economy is growing. That also brings good news, it brings not so good news. It also tells us that people are moving to this zip code. In fact, I was driving to a meeting just this past week, and I was going whatever direction that is on Brown Road, and I noticed that between where our office is and Val Vista, that there were 4 brand new housing complexes going up I never knew existed. 4 brand new. This says a lot about the kind of ministries you do. That means, using the national average of 2.53 people per household, that 6,000 people are going to be moving into these residences somewhere in the next 90 days to 6 months or so. That talks a lot about the kind of ministry we need to do. That means we've got to be more intentional and more intense in how we develop our connection groups and how we plant them around the 85205. That informs the kind of classes that we're going to need to be sharing when we get into our facility through what we call Connect University. That talks about the importance of relationships, because a lot of these people, according to stuff I can't quote right now, they came moving in from other areas. How many of you here are actually from Arizona? About 7 of you. That means people, the 6,000 people occupying these houses, statistically speaking, are going to need relationships. They're going to need community. They're going to need friendships. It tells us a little bit about the economics width and bandwidth and spread of our community. It talks about how the economy is growing. And then you add to that there are 52 separate apartment complexes. Are these transient folks just moving in and out depending on the job market? Are they single parents who are going through one of those 16% divorces and they're trying to pick up again? Is it someone who's newly married and they haven't saved money for a house, so they're living in an apartment while they do that? There's all kinds of stuff going into this that informs who we are, where we're going, and how we're going to get there, and why we exist. Now, the question there in the middle of your worship notes that we have to answer is this: why is this so important? Down at the bottom of your worship notes, here's the answer to that. This is so important because God needs churches where there are people. As a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, there in your worship notes, just right above that, there's a little blank space, big enough for you to draw a little circle. So I want you to draw a little circle. And I want you to pretend that that circle represents the 85205. And almost in the middle of that circle, just slightly south of the middle, put a dot. I never knew until this week what I'm about to share with you. That dot, just almost in the smack dab middle of the circle that represents the 85205, is our church. I didn't realize when we made this move that God put us smack dab in the center of this zip code, 43,000 people, 37,000 plus who need a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Now, here's the asterisk to all of that, the caveat, the thing that makes this all so important to you and me. This isn't just people. Folks, this is all kinds of people from all walks of life. And that means that if we're going to do healthy ministry, it's going to get really messy. I just happen to believe that God's going to use Connect Church in the middle of the 85205 to build a beautiful mess of a church. That means that you're going to walk in any Sunday morning and you're going to look around and there are going to be people there who don't look like you, they don't dress like you, they don't vote like you, they don't think like you, they don't listen to the same music as you, they don't eat the same food as you. It's going to be messy. And it's going to be beautiful. And then here's the thing that God does. You got all of that difference going on. And yet all of our children are going to the same schools. All of our grandchildren are playing in the same little leagues and soccer and soccer leagues. And all of these people are going to need some place to go and find the hope of a Savior named Jesus Christ. Do you think It was accidental or providential that unknowingly we got put smack dab in the middle of the 85205. Providential, folks. God had a plan from years and years ago when He saw what we were doing. That's why in a couple of weeks, when we do our spiritual gifts class, and you saw that in the email from me this past week, that's why we know what our spiritual gifts are, because it's going to take every one of us living as God created, designed, and purposed us to live to fulfill His vision for reaching this community for His sake. Thousands of years ago, the children of Israel had gotten a little comfortable, and they had started getting wayward from the Lord their God. And God allowed the Babylonians to come in and kind of overtake them. And then the Babylonians did something from a military perspective and a cultural perspective that we would look at as being very politically incorrect today. What the Babylonians did is once they brought into captivity the entire nation of Israel, they separated the people who we might say, to use modern language, who had advanced degrees, the people who were the leaders of industry, the people who were the most educated, and they took all of those people and they moved them to the Babylonian capital. They left what we in our culture today would call the working class people back down in their homeland. And one of the prophets who understood that this was God's judgment began boldly speaking out and writing letters to the people who had been taken away. It's a prophet by the name of Jeremiah. And he wasn't real popular. And I'll say something else about Jeremiah. Jeremiah wasn't taken away with the religious leaders and the government leaders and the political leaders and the business leaders. Jeremiah was left behind. And here's Jeremiah left behind in the eyes of the leaders of that community. It's kind of a no account, and he's calling them into account, and they're not happy with him. And so they take Jeremiah and they throw him in a dungeon in the evening. And during the days, here's what they did. They stripped him naked. They put him out in the courtyard of the community in stocks. And so that people would come by and they would pluck his beard. They would come by to his naked backside and smack it or whip it or whatever they wanted to do, or punch him in the face, because he kind of became the laughingstock of the entire community because he was proclaiming God's message to people. And Jeremiah told the folks who were been carried away and carried into the Babylonian land, who were trying to be passive aggressive and fighting the oppression that they felt that they were unjustly called into. Here's what Jeremiah says to them in chapter 27. He says these words. He says, "For those of you up there who have been pulled away from our homeland and you've been taken into captivity and you don't like your circumstances, here's a word from the Lord." Jeremiah says, "Build homes and plan to stay there. Plant vineyards, for you will be there many years." That didn't make them happy. He goes on and say, "Marry and have children, and then find mates for them and have many grandchildren. Multiply, don't dwindle away." And then he says these words to them in verse number 7. Jeremiah says, "And work for the peace and destruction of Babylon." No. For the peace and prosperity of Babylon. Pray for Babylon, for if Babylon has peace, so will you. I actually like this verse a lot. I was thinking about this, and the David Harris translation would say, "Build homes and plan to stay. Put down roots, for you're going to be there a long time. Marry and have children, and then find mates for them and have grandchildren. And do not dwindle away." In other words, don't wander away from Connect Church just because it gets a little difficult at times. Work for the peace and the prosperity of Mesa. Pray for Mesa, because if Mesa has peace, so will Connect Church have peace. Now, I like the way that Eugene Peterson translates this in the Message version. Here's how he phrases it. Build houses and make yourself at home. Put in gardens and eat what grows. Marry and have children, and encourage your children to marry and have children so that you'll thrive in Mesa. And you won't just waste away. Make yourselves at home in Mesa and work for Mesa's welfare. Pray for Mesa's well-being. Let me ask you, folks, you don't raise your hands. How many of you spent 10 minutes on your face before God praying for Mesa this week? We're on the news every night. It's not like we don't have stuff to pray for. The 85205 needs our prayers. You know, there's an old cliche I grew up hearing. I assume it's true. It says, when we work, we work. And when we pray, God works. Pray for Mesa's well-being. Pray to get Mesa off the 6 o'clock news. Because if things go well in Mesa, things will begin to go well for Connect Church. Now here's what I want you to do. There in your notes, I want you to do this week. Go to BibleGateway.com and look at this passage in a half a dozen different translations. But here's the thing. I want you to read this through the eyes of a white person. Here's why that's so important. We are the majority, ethnically speaking, in this zip code. What are we doing to make a difference for our community and for the minority who are part of this zip code? And then here's what I want you to do. I want you to read this passage through the eyes of a Hispanic immigrant. When it says marry and have children and grandchildren and put down roots, I can imagine some of my Latino friends going, how do we do that? I don't even speak the language. Where do we fit in? What kind of jobs can we get that are going to sustain our family so that we can grow our household income to $61,000? I can imagine some of them going, and is there a church that will allow us to worship with them? Is there a church that will integrate our children into their youth ministry and their children's ministry? What does this say about the need for us to work even harder at developing the wonderful work that's being done by some of you in our English as second language classes? Our involvement in the local elementary schools and junior high schools. When you read this through eyes like mine, you see one thing. When you read it through eyes of some of my Latino friends, you see another thing. And then here's something else I want you to do. Considering who we are and where we are as a congregation, just about 13 months old now, I want you to read this through the eyes of a Christian in a new church plant. I'm reading this through the eyes of one of us sitting in a junior high auditorium while our future home's being built, and we're essentially a new church plant. I'm hearing Jeremiah say, make this your home. Don't be just a guest. Don't be a visitor. Abide here. Don't dwindle away. Just because it gets difficult doesn't mean God's not in it. Pour yourself into teaching and the serving and the sharing and the caring and the giving and the loving. And here's what I want you to know this morning, especially if you're relatively new around here. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you are, and however you are valued at Connect Church because we believe God's using all of us to build a beautiful mess of a church for His glory. It's okay if you believe that, to say so. Nobody ran for the exit, so I'm guessing we're all in there. What if we could somehow share the news with this community? Instead of, hey, we want you to come and do this, as then you can be a part of our church. What if we said, come and share your dream with us, and we'll help you fulfill it? And so when you read Jeremiah's words through these eyes, you see a totally different application and adaptation. And you can do the same thing based on your own circumstances. Based on your gender. What does that look like? Based on your sexuality. How do we serve one another? Based on your family situation, based on your marital situation, based on your job situation. See, lots of times in churches, we don't mean to, but what we do is we put up big, bright, flashing neon green signs that say, keep out. Even though we want to say, everybody's welcome. And I'm just old enough to remember the Sunday school song that said, and they'll know we are Christians by the message we preach and how well we dress on Sundays. Apparently some of you are old enough to remember those lyrics too. You laughed because I didn't get them right, did I? It says, and you'll know we are Christians by our love. By our love. By our love. I got a text message early this morning from my friend Bill Max, and some of you are aware that prior to coming to Connect and us getting involved in this, I was the interim pastor of a church of 4,000 in Sacramento. Bill sent me this text this morning knowing what he's the executive pastor of that church. He said, David, the world is desperate for the church to be filled with loving, unified, vibrant followers of Jesus. They just don't know it yet. May Connect Church be one such body today, and then may it stick in the weeks, months, and years ahead. That was my friend's prayer for us today. Now, for those of you who know a little bit about the Hollywood scene and screenwriting or Broadway, all good writers have a little phrase that they use that informs their writing. There in your outline, we call it an inciting incident. Here's what an inciting incident is. An inciting incident has two parts. One, things that happen to you that you cannot control, or things you make happen that you can control. And I was thinking about this conversation in light of that and who we are becoming and what we're doing. And so one of the inciting incidents for Connect Church was that we couldn't control was we recognized that with approximately 100,000 people living within about a 5 square mile radius, that 87,000 of them essentially did not know Jesus. But in the temporary location we were meeting in Greenfield in Maine as we were getting going, we couldn't reach those people because it was 90% empty throughout the 6 months of the year. So we made the choice, the inciting incident that we could control, to move, unknowing at that time, to the middle of the 85205. You still with me? That was part of the inciting incident. And then you go through all of that stuff. And I thought about, well, we made the move, and we spent the better part of last year meeting in the Silver Star Theater, and then we had inciting incidents we couldn't control. The theater goes under construction. We have to move into the children's thing, and 20% of our people dwindle away, as Jeremiah said. And then we get back into the main theater, and they find out that our construction has been delayed due to costs that essentially added 50% to our construction costs. And they decided, well, if you're going to be here longer, we're going to add 50% to your rent costs. And it went up $500 a week on an 8 hours notice. Inciting incident. Some people said, well, that doesn't work for us. We're out of here. And some more dwindled away. And then to try and make it work mathematically for the church, we made the financial decision to move a couple blocks away to this school. So more people said, well, we'll just wait until you get in your new building, and we're just going to go hang out someplace else until you get there. All inciting incidents. We made one choice to move, and all of that happened and we couldn't control. So you've got all of that going on. And then you've got the costs and all of that stuff. And here's what I got to thinking about. 2 weeks ago, we did the town hall meeting and followed up with a whole bunch of updates with you all. Many of you were there. We had some great news. Then on Tuesday, literally as I was going to bed, I get an email that knocked the winds out of my sails. Another construction issue. And so I sent an email at 2 in the morning to our elders saying we need to meet like that night. And we talked for about 20 minutes about the situation. Decided it was an inciting incident we could not control. And so we did the one thing we could control. We went to prayer for about the next 20 to 25 minutes. I'm not going to give you the details. If you're interested, you can see me in private or ask one of our elders. I just don't want to take the time to do it right now. But following that prayer, over the next 7 days, everything we laid on our faces and poured our hearts out to God about, God took care of. Everything. And I'm reminded of this. When it comes to our dream, if your dream and our dream doesn't scare us, it's too small. Here's why. When it comes to living out a God-sized dream, a God-sized dream is always beyond our ability and our resources, and unless God does it, it can't be done. Because God does things we can't do so that only He gets the glory. And here's something else you should know, folks. God honors big dreams because big dreams honor our big God. Some of us in this room need to repent from having dreams too small for a God so awesome. Somebody ought to tweet it. That's pretty good. Some of us in this room need to repent for having dreams too small for a God who's so awesome. And folks, that's why. That's why we have prayer at 11:30 to 11:45 over at our future facility every Sunday until we move in. We're still planning on being in there, at least in phase 1, in about 60 days. Here's the second thing I understand about this inciting incident. No conflict, no story. You know, you think about it. Whether you read it in the Bible, or you watch it in a movie, or your favorite television show, or you see it in books, or you see it in sports, or in life, the people we call heroes are people who have a great story of overcoming things. You see it in marriages. You know, I used to run leadership conferences. It seemed like every person I had speak at one of those conferences had a new tragedy every year, so they had a new story to tell. Now, I get that it's easier to watch conflict and the working out of that conflict on the big screen, or to read it on the pages of a book, or to read it in the Bible. But here's what I want us as a congregation to know. Great conflict cultivates great character. And just because it's difficult doesn't mean God's not in it. I absolutely hate. Am I allowed to say that in church? I absolutely hate Christian cliches. Most Christians ought to stay off Facebook. They're embarrassing the church and embarrassing God. And you can tweet that too. But when I met with our elders that night, in fact, when I was praying with the team last week over at the facility, when you come face to face with reality and all you have is God, you begin to recognize things about God that while many churches and many Christians have turned them into cliches, there's also a lot of truth. So remember my comment, no conflict, no story? That night when the elders and I were sitting around Marilyn and Lionel Predmore's table trying to figure this out and pouring ourselves out to God, in that moment I was reminded there's a reason why Moses leading the people of Israel through the Red Sea on dry ground is in the Bible. There's a reason why a little shepherd boy named David taking down a giant named Goliath is in the Bible. There's a reason why a man named Joshua leading the children of Israel across a flooded Jordan River, taking down the walls of a fortified city named Jericho is in the Bible. There's a reason that a man named Elijah who shot down 400 prophets of Baal was in the Bible. There's a reason that a man named Lazarus who was dead, buried, and grieved over and comes rising out of that tomb is in the Bible. There's a reason a man named Paul and a buddy named Silas who were singing songs in the middle of the night in a Roman jail is in the Bible. There's a reason that a man named Jesus who conquered death, hell, and the grave and rose victorious and now sits at the right hand of God ever interceding for you and me is in the Bible. And there's a reason that if the Bible was still being written, Connect Church would be in it for future generations. No conflict, no story. There's a really, really telling phrase right there, the last set of blanks in your outline. I attribute these to author and pastor Mark Batterson in some of his writings. Here's what Mark says. Most people believe God is real, but very few people actually live like it. No offense. They allow their circumstances to get between them and God, instead of letting God get between them and their circumstances. Most people believe God is real, but very few people actually live like it. They allow their circumstances to get between them and God, instead of letting God get between them and their circumstances. Folks, here's what I want you to understand. Faithfulness to God is not merely holding down the fort. It's unleashing God in the midst of the impossible. See, you can do nothing wrong and still be doing nothing right. That's what God's calling us to. So Jeremiah sends that letter up to Babylon to all the priests and the religious and governmental leaders, and their response isn't so great. So God decides that he's going to do something a little bit stronger. He tells Jeremiah that they're going to be there for 70 years. And Jeremiah, here's how I'm going to prove my faithfulness to them, is I want you to go and buy a field. And he's got his cousin there as a witness and some other people. And they signed the documents. And Jeremiah buys this property. Basically, God symbolizing through this prophet that nobody likes, is the reason he's called the weeping prophet in the Bible, that God's going to be doing something. And then Jeremiah prays this prayer to God. Now here's what you have to understand. Other than God telling Jeremiah to write that letter and a couple other things, while Jeremiah has been the laughingstock of the country, Jeremiah's been the butt of all the late night jokes from all the late night television hosts. He's the guy that's on the front of Time magazine and Newsweek, and he's the guy that all the blogs are making fun of, and all the YouTubers are doing jokes about because they're going about and smacking his little bare bottom out in the courtyard and taking their pliers and pulling his beard out. God's been silent. God hasn't said a word. And in Jeremiah chapter 32, for the first time in years, God finally speaks. Here's what God says. I am the Lord your God, the God of all mankind. Is there anything too difficult for me? Got it, Jeremiah? I am the Lord your God, the God of all mankind. Is there anything too difficult for me? Got it? Connect Church? The burden is real, right? The physical burden of finishing a construction project that is already 6 months and hundreds of thousands of dollars overdue. And yet God's saying, is there anything too difficult to me? Some of you need to cut that out of your notes this week and put it on your fridge. Some of you need to put it on your computer. A few of you need to put it on your bathroom scales. It took me a minute, but you got it, right? See, I know how to win friends and influence enemies, don't I? But maybe we as a congregation need to make this our prayer. Make it our clarion call. Every one of us in here has got something going on in our lives that we're trying to figure out. We're looking for acceptance. We're looking for security. We're looking for hope. We're looking for a place to belong. And I have talked for a year now ad nauseum about a safe place for all kinds of people to come in. You've got the statistics in front of you. You've got the scripture behind you to support what it is that God's doing. I think we need to make this our prayer. We need to pray it when we're giving our offerings. We need to pray it when we're serving others. We need to pray it when we're inviting people we think are going to say no. We need to pray it when our kids are in trouble. We need to pray it when our marriage is struggling. And we need to pray it when we drive by our future home. We need to pray it when we drive through the 85205. And we need to pray it when we go by our schools. And we need to pray it when we go by the new housing developments. And we need to pray it when we go through Starbucks. I am the Lord your God. Is there anything too difficult for me? I want to make sure you understand it. So just do that phrase by phrase. Repeat after me. I am the Lord your God.
I am the Lord your God.
The God of all mankind.
The God of all mankind.
Is there anything too difficult for me? One more time. Repetition breeds understanding. I am the Lord your God.
I am the Lord your God.
The God of all mankind.
The God of all mankind.
Is there anything
Too
difficult
difficult
for me?
for me?
God bless you, folks.